Hi again. Samuel Andrews, Christianity and Anti-Christianity and Their Final Conflict. This chapter is Tendencies of Modern Biblical Criticism. It is well known that biblical criticism has greatly changed its character within a few years. This is written at the end of the 19th century. It is said by Federer in his development of theology that the year 1835 marked an era, three works then appearing by Vatka, Strauss, and F.C. Bauer, so fundamentally differing from earlier works and showing so predominantly the new element that, quote, we are justified in taking from these the special character of the biblical criticism of today, unquote. Let us ask, in what consists the special character of the biblical criticism of today? We find it in the attempt to adjust the statements of the Scriptures, doctrinal and historical, to certain new ruling ideas, pantheistic, agnostic, evolutionary, scientific, and to reject all that cannot be thus adjusted. We may divide the critics of whom we here speak into the two general classes. First, those who deny a personal God or any knowledge of him if he exists, and second, those who reject some fundamental facts or principles affirmed in the Bible, thus destroying its unity and undermining the faith of men in it as the revelation of a divine purpose and will. First, it need scarcely be said that all criticism of a book purporting to be a historical account of the actings of God with men from the earliest times must take its character mainly from the critic's conception of God and of his relations to men. If the critic conceives of him in the pantheistic way, as absolute spirit, impersonal, unconscious, without will or purpose, or as the unknowable force of the agnostics, then the Bible is on the face of it incredible. No man can accept it as credible who does not believe in such a God as it sets forth, one who is in the fullest sense personal, who has made and rules all things according to his will, who has a purpose in human history which he makes known to men, who can give them ordinances and rites of worship, and reward or punish them according as they obey or disobey. If there be not such a God, making known his truth to those whom he chooses, and inspiring them to teach others, the Bible is a record of what could not possibly have taken place. Its Jehovah is a being who does not exist, and all its accounts of his dealings with men are idle fictions. When, therefore, a critic sits in judgment on the Bible, we ask him, first of all, what he believes respecting God and his relations to men. Can these relations, as presented in it, be true? If his conception of God be such that he starts with the assumption of the necessary untruthfulness of most important points of the biblical record, it is idle to consider his criticism in detail. If indeed that can be called criticism which assumes the necessary falsity of the statements criticized. Now he has a footnote to this. In Jewish history, as presented by the pantheistic critics, we have not the dealings of God with the Jews, but the evolution of their, that is the Jews', conception of God. The historical statements have value chiefly as illustrative of the growth of spiritual ideas. God is not a person making known to them in gradual revelation a purpose in which he calls them, the workers together with him, but an impersonal spiritual principle developing itself in them. It is on this ground that such histories of the Jews as given by Kuhnen, Royce, Renan, Menzies, and others, although they may have value for the critical student, tend to weaken the faith of the general reader in the biblical history. If this does not conform to the historian's philosophy of God and of man's religious development, the conclusion is foregone that the events could not have taken place as narrated. Then back to the main text. We may then exclude from the class of true biblical critics all those who, denying a personal God, make thereby the fundamental statements of the Scriptures, dogmatic and historical, impossible. And the agnostic must also be excluded, since his affirmation of the unknowability of God is, in substance, a positive assertion that the Bible, as a revelation of his character and will, cannot be true. of its essential falsity to the atheist, it is not necessary to speak. The critics of these several classes are thus set free from any inquiry as to the reality of the great facts on which biblical history rests: the creation, the relation of Adam to the race, the fall, the redemption, the incarnation. Its foundation truths denied in advance, the Bible ceases to be a sacred and authoritative book, and has an interest for the critic only as the sacred books of other peoples have, that he may show its origin, its gradual growth, how its statements came to be believed, and what influence they have had in molding modern religious belief. Its study is mainly a matter of antiquarian research, and its chief value is as an illustration of one conspicuous form of religious development. It may seem strange that pantheists, agnostics, and atheists should think it worthwhile to employ themselves upon such a work as of supererogation as to attack the Bible in detail when they have already condemned it in the gross. But many books of this kind of pseudo-criticism are yearly written. We may take as an eminent example Strauss in his Life of Jesus. With his pantheistic conception of God and his relations to men, he could not accept the Gospels as possibly true. Such a man as the incarnate Son, the Christ of the Church, could never have lived. Undoubtedly there lived the man, Jesus, a supereminent religious genius, yet in nature a man like other men, without supernatural powers, a son of his age. And the work of criticism is to separate the nucleus of historical truth in the gospel narratives from the incrustations that have grown up around it. The reader, knowing his philosophical starting point, knows from the first to what conclusion Strauss will come. And that, even if there were absolute agreement among the evangelists as to the details of the Lord's earthly life, the more important of their statements would have been rejected all the same. Again, let us take the agnostic Matthew Arnold, the son, by the way, of the great educated Thomas Arnold, and a great poet, but not a great thinker. Matthew Arnold, with his critical presuppositions as he has expressed himself in his book, God and the Bible. The God of the Bible is, quote, the eternal power that makes for righteousness. Not personal, not a being who thinks and loves. All that we know of this power, we know in the same way we know of the force of gravitation, by its effect upon us. We know no more of the nature of one than of the other. And there's a footnote to that remark by Arnold. It says, Mr. Arnold is unwilling that this power should be called the unknowable, for he feels the absurdity of saying the unknowable is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Out of the depths have I cried unto the unknowable. He explains the Jehovah of the Hebrews by affirming him to be the unconscious deification of the law of righteousness. And back to the main text. All the miraculous statements we are to regard as poetry or legend, and so also what he calls the materialistic features, the supernatural birth and bodily resurrection of Jesus, the expectation of a messianic kingdom, and of a new heaven and earth. The fall of man is alleged, Satan an imaginary being. Theology goes upon data furnished by a time of imperfect observation and boundless credulity. That sentence is all from Arnold. There being so little of doctrinal and historical truth in the Bible, we ask with some surprise what Mr. Arnold can find in it to commend it to popular reading. For he tells us, quote, the world cannot be without it, and we desire to bring the masses to use it, unquote. After taking away all that it teaches of a personal God, of his incarnate Son, of creation, of sin, of atonement, of resurrection, of judgment, we wonder to be told that we may still retain in the expurgated book, quote, the elements of a religion more serious, potent, awe-inspiring, and profound than any which the world has yet seen. So Arnold appears to think Christianity the supreme religion, but ultimately unreal. More about the critics next time. So we have a partial acceptance of the Bible, as Andrews puts it at the top of the page, in this kind of criticism. It's not total rejection. It sees the value of the book, but only primarily as a religious history, or a understanding, a method of understanding religious growth on the planet. I'll put in a link to another spirit that was alive at the very same time as Andrews and Matthew Arnold, that is B.F. Westcott. His response to the new higher criticism was much different than Matthew Arnold and the others named here. Westcott wrote the commentary on John, published around 1880, and another supreme masterpiece, his commentary on Hebrews, and another one on the epistles of John. Here's Westcott in this video on John 1:1, which makes, of course, that great claim that the one who lived in the body of Jesus of Nazareth is the same one who created the world, the Logos, the Word himself, who became flesh and dwelt among us. And, of course, he said something else in John 1:1, that Word was with God and was God. See you next time. Oh, by the way, I'll also put in the Westcott playlist, which is only about 9 videos, I think, but they're all well worth it because they have some pretty heavy quotes from one of the world's greatest Bible scholars of all time. See you then.